and start sharing. Okay, so last time I had motivated the Dimer model, uh, which I also called well, Dimer model, by which I mean perfect matchings. So recall that if you have a undirected simple graph G, then a matching is a set of pairwise non-adjacent edges like that, and a maximal and maximum matching I defined, and a perfect matching is one in which every vertex is covered. And I gave this example. And I didn't explain why it's called a one factor. So in general, a k factor is a subgraph such that each vertex in that subgraph has degree k. So here each vertex has degree 1, so it's called a one factor also. But I'll not use that term, just to tell you. And so it's also called a dimer covering because, as I explained, you can think of each of these as a diatomic molecule spanning the two vertices, and so it's a covering by dimers. Okay, so and this problem is called the dimer model, and so to each dimer covering we have a weight which is the product of the edge weights, and we want to get a formula for the partition function of this model. So that's the aim, and towards that I defined the Pfaffian and stated Cayley's theorem. I did not prove it. And I give you a reference, but as I said, you'll find the internet. Yes? Is there a question? Okay. So now before going further, I want to give you alternate definitions of the Pfaffian, just for your information. So I will again not prove them, but these are good to know. So one is, and people define them in this way as well. So just so that you see, if you see them, you know what's going on. So first is the following. So let In in S2n be, let me call it I2n just to avoid confusion. So S2n is the symmetric group on 2n letters. So this is the subset of permutations sigma such that sigma 1 is less than sigma 2, sigma 3 is less than sigma 4, etc. Sigma 2n minus 1 is less than sigma 2n, and sigma 1 is less than sigma 3 is less than sigma 2n minus 1. So then the Pfaffian instead, okay, so write the formula. Sigma I2n, in I2n, sine of sigma. This is the usual sign of a permutation. Sigma 1, sigma 2, A, sigma 3, sigma 4, etc. A, sigma 2n minus 1, sigma 2n. So let's compare. So here, remember, I defined the Pfaffian as a sum over matchings of 2n points on a circle, and to each such matching I associated a sign which was -1 to the number of crossings. And here I'm saying that instead of a sum over matchings, you have a sum over these guys. These permutations which satisfy such inequalities, which by the way should seem similar to the inequalities that we stated for an element of the matching. That we did just to sort of fix a convention, and here also it's sort of the same reason. Okay, this is one equivalent definition. The second one is that you can write directly the Pfaffian of A as a sum over all permutations in S2n, and the same terms as above. So A is sigma 3, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3, sigma 4, dot dot dot, A sigma 2n minus 1, sigma 2n, and what you will have is this extra factor of 2 to the n. Okay, so I mean it's worth thinking about why these two things. But yeah, so that's I mean it's not terribly difficult, but it involves some checking. Okay, so it's just for your information. You will see all these three formulas in the literature, and so it's useful to know this. Okay, so why did we talk about Pfaffians? So let's go back to the dimer model. So let G be a graph like the surface of this lattice, which has a perfect matching. Okay, so let's take one silly example. So what I'm going to do now is to talk about the connection between dimers and Pfaffians.
Sir, Pfaffian is defined for all matrices, but I mean even dimensional matrices, but the identity only holds for skew symmetry.
That's it. That's it. I mean, Pfaffian is defined for wait. So Pfaffian is defined, at least the way I defined it, is for real skew symmetric matrix of even dimension, and you can replace this real by complex, but then this doesn't have much. Because as you know, skew symmetry is not the right thing for complex matrices. It's skew Hermitian. And I should say the reason this doesn't work for Cayley's theorem doesn't work for odd guys is if you have a 2n plus 1 by 2n plus 1 real skew symmetric matrix, then the determinant is going to be 0. So there's nothing to talk about. Okay, so let's do this with an example. So suppose G is a graph that admits a perfect matching. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to define something which is similar to an adjacency matrix. Okay, so maybe I should say first what an adjacency. So an adjacency, the adjacency matrix of a graph so since we are in we are going to give weights to edges. I'm talking about weighted graphs, again simple and non undirected. The adjacency matrix of A of a graph G is a square matrix indexed by G equals indexed by V. So rows and columns are indexed by V such that A VW is the weight of E if E is VW and is 0 otherwise. Okay, so if two vertices are connected by an edge, then in the corresponding VWth entry, if the two vertices are VW, then you put the weight in that entry and you put a 0 otherwise. So in particular, because our graphs are going to be simple, you will have zeros on the diagonals, and because the graph is undirected, this will be a symmetric matrix. Okay, so this is the notion of an adjacency matrix. We will need something more refined. So again, define it formally. An orientation of an undirected graph is an assignment of arrows to the edges. Okay, so what we are going to do is to each edge we are going to assign an arrow. So, okay, so let me give one more definition and then I'll do an example illustrating all these three concepts. So okay, so let O be an orientation of a graph G then the oriented adjacency matrix denoted case of O of G, which I might omit the subscript and all that if the context is clear, is the square matrix indexed by O such that K O of V comma W is plus WE if V, the orientation is from V to W in O. So this implies that VW is an edge already. Minus WE if W goes to V in O and 0 otherwise. Okay. So this says that the oriented adjacency matrix is skew symmetric. I mean, assuming the weights are real numbers. Well, not necessarily. Okay, forget I said. Okay. So, okay. So now let us see an example. So let me take a dumb example. So
Sir?
Yes.
Why is this indexed by O?
Why is the what?
Why is the matrix?
Because the orientation is.
No, I mean it's still indexed by the vertices, right?
Oh, what did I say? Indexed by V. Thank you. Yes, that was a typo. Okay, so let's take a simple example. So let me take a square. Okay. And I want to give edge weight. So let me give horizontal edges weight A and vertical edges weight B. And let me also label the graph in some way. So let's say 1, 2, 3. Okay. So then A is what? So I'll label the graph. I'll index the vertices in the obvious way. So I have, this is symmetric. So I'll just draw things above the diagonal. So there is an edge from 1 to 2, so I get A here. There's no edge from 1 to 3, and there's an edge from 1 to 4 having weight B, so I have that. So okay, maybe I'll do it once, then I won't do it again. 2 to 3 has weight B, 2 to 4 does not. 2 to 4 is not an edge, and 3, 4 is an edge with weight A. And so I also get A0, B, B0, A. Okay. All right, so that's, I mean, the symmetry was obvious. Okay, so then let us fix an orientation. So, so let me choose O so that I goes to J if I is less than 0. So the orientation is from smaller to larger. Okay, so I didn't, no, sorry, so let me, yeah, I didn't take a good example, sorry. So I should do 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is the orientation, this is A, and let me adjust, this is, oh, so, okay, so I didn't have anything to adjust. No, I did, sorry, I did. So 1 goes to 3 now with B, and 1 does not go to 4. 2 goes to 4 now with B, and 2 does not go to 4. Yes. So let me fix this as well. So B is 0, 0. Okay. Then KO is again 1, 2, 3, 4. So then it's 0 on the diagonal. Okay, so now 1 to 2 is A because it's a plus A just to make it clear. 1, 2, 3 is plus B. There's nothing here. Nothing here. 3 to 4 is a plus B, and 2 to 4 is a plus B, and 3 to 4 is a plus A. So this is minus A minus B, 0, 0 minus B minus A. So the convenience of this orientation, because of my choice of labeling or ordering rather, is that everything above the diagonal is positive, everything below the diagonal is negative. Okay, so okay, so this graph clearly has a perfect matching. So let's so remember our notation. Let me remind you. for the dimer model on this graph. So we'll sum over all perfect matchings of the graph, and to each perfect matching we'll have the weight, which is the product of the edge weights, and we'll sum it and we'll get the partition. So then, let me finish this computation. So what is ZG? So what are the perfect matchings or dimers? So there's one in which 1 and 2 are connected and 3 and 4 are connected, and the weight of that is A times A, so I get an A squared from that. And there's one in which 1 and 3 are connected and 2 and 4 are connected and both have weight B, so I'll get a B squared from that. Right, so note that ZG does not depend on either the labeling or the orientation. I mean, these are additional pieces of information which the dimer model doesn't care about. All you need to give me is the graph and the edge weights, and the dimer model, I mean the partition function just needs to do that. Okay, but remember that for a perfect matching to exist, which is what we are going to be looking at, you have to have an even number of vertices. That's a necessary condition. Right? Otherwise, how will you form so many? I mean, how will you match all the edges? So as a result, your KO is always going to be an even antisymmetric matrix. Also, KO is always an even skew symmetric matrix for any O, rather for any G which admits a perfect matching, and any orientation also. So we can calculate the Pfaffian. So let's calculate the Pfaffian. Pfaffian of KO is what? Okay, I'll omit the G. This is our G. Okay, so we already have done this actually in the previous example. For this 4x4 matrix, we computed the Pfaffian. So it's A12, 4x4 skew symmetric matrix. A12, A34. So let's do that. So A is K theta. So A12 is A times A34, which is A again. So that's A times A, minus A13, which is B, A24, which is B, plus A14, which is this 0, and you get this 0. So which is A squared minus B squared. So something nice has happened, that we have gotten all the terms in the dimer configuration. So the A squared here is this A squared, and this B squared is this B squared. Is this a coincidence? What do you think? Anybody? think about the definition of the Pfaffian and the definition of the dimer covering.
So one can see a bijection between the terms of the Pfaffian and the perfect matching. So to corresponding to each perfect matching, we can have a term in the Pfaffian and vice versa.
You can have a term in the Pfaffian, yes.
Yes.
So that's the point. So, so the key point is that, as you said, there is a one-to-one correspondence between perfect matchings of G and terms in the Pfaffian of Kg, of K whole. Okay, why? So let us try to understand that. So a Pfaffian is going to be non-zero. Oh, sorry, I should have said non-zero terms. Okay. So look at the Pfaffian here. So it's going to be non-zero. Look at a term in the Pfaffian. It's going to be non-zero if there's an edge between I1, J1, there's an edge between I2, J2, and there, etc. There's an edge between I and J. By construction, all of these are distinct, and they have to. I mean, the set I1, J1 up to I and Jn has to be equal to the set 1 through 2n. So that means that each one of these guys is going to be is going to correspond, is going to be the weight for a perfect matching. Conversely, given a perfect matching, we are going to find a way of labeling. I mean, so the graph is already labeled. We are going to be able to find a representative which satisfies this condition. I1, I case should be less than j case, and j1 less than j2. So that will give you one term over here. Okay. So that means that we get a one-to-one correspondence, and so the Pfaffian is the natural thing for calculating the partition function of the graph, of the dimer model on this graph. Is that clear? So each term over here corresponds to one perfect matching of C. Okay. But what is the problem? The problem you can already see here. This partition function is a sum of manifestly positive, is a manifestly positive sum, but there is no such guarantee for the Pfaffian. In particular, different orientations will give you different signs. Okay, this is the issue of signs. Okay, so and also dependence on the orientation. Well, okay, that's not really a problem. That's actually going to help us. Okay, so what is the point? So given a perfect matching, did I have some notation for this setup? Okay, so let's yeah. So maybe I will first define this. So let script m of G be the set of perfect matchings. Okay. So given m in Mg, so we get signs from two things. The orientations of edges, let's say signs, I mean signs in far of KO from, right? Remember that we are giving signs to some edges. Okay, so we are going to, I mean, we are giving signs to all edges, and depending on the orientation, we'll get a sign. Also, the sign of the permutation, the sign or sign of the matching, mu, i.e. -1 to the chi. Okay. So both of these things are corresponding to the sign, contributing to the sign. So one way out, so a trivial way out is to work with something called the Hafnian. So what is the Hafnian? So that's the analog of the permanent. So we call the permanent of a matrix I'm not going to need this. I'm just recall. I mean, I'm just telling you this for completeness. There's a perm of A. Is the sum over permutations A1 sigma 1 etc. A and sigma. So it's basically the determinant without the sign business. Similarly, the Hafnian is HF of A. So it's like the Hafnian, exactly like this, but without the sign. So it's the sum over mu in Mn. Mu is I1, J1, etc. to Jn. A, I1, J1, etc. A, I1, J. Work with the Hafnian for A. So remember, A already has positive entries. Right? So if you remember, I told you that you should think of the weights as energies, and so you think of them as positive real numbers. And so then this is a manifestly positive matrix, and if you work with the Hafnian, each term is going to be positive. And by this argument, you're going to get a one-to-one correspondence with perfect match. And so this is a trivial way out of working with this. What's the problem? So the problem with this approach is that HF of A is not a nice object. It's very hard to do any computations. It's hard to prove any results for the Hafkian. I mean, it's the same kind of problem with the permanent, if you know what that is. I mean, these are simply not nice objects in that sense. So if you want to prove anything for as the size goes to infinity, all that, you know, whereas the determinant is a much nicer object to work with, and so is the Pfaffian. So as you might have guessed, if you didn't already, Pfaffian is named after a mathematician, Pfaff. It's a German. And I think this Hafnian is more like a joke. I don't think there's anybody called Hafnius. Okay, it's just a play on words. Okay, so right. So now let's go back to this. So let's try to compute I mean, let's try to analyze the signs. I mean, we want to get rid of the signs. So let's try to see how to go about that. Okay. So okay. So suppose M in Mg is I1. So it's I1, J1, etc. up to INJ. So G is of size 2n and let's say has edges. Okay, so okay. So what we want to do now is we want to compute the sign of this guy. So right. So let me define the sign of it. Okay. So right. Okay. So just give me a second. Right. So define epsilon O of m. So the sign is going to, of course, depend on the orientation. Is this okay? So this I'm going to have to give a name. Okay, let me. I need some notation. So let sigma be the permutation, or rather, okay, maybe it's better to go by the matching. So let mu be the corresponding matching. In Mn. Remember this guy. Okay, so then you think of this as a matching over there, and what we are going to do is to define sign the sign of the matching as sign of mu times the product L equals 1 to n. Okay, this is epsilon O IL JL of EL, where, okay, let me move this back up. Where, okay, so epsilon O of IL JL of E is equal to, so E is the edge epsilon ij of E. So E is the edge ij. This is plus 1 if E goes from I to j in O, and minus 1 if E is the edge coming from j to I. Okay. So what we have done is to separate out the signs from the edge orientations and from the sign of the matching. So this is the sign of the matching and this is the edge orientation. Okay. And what we explained above by the bijection is that Pfaffian of KO is the sum over perfect matchings of G of epsilon O of M. Did I call it weight or W? So I called it weight of M. So this is the WT of M. Okay. So there is a sign here which depends on the orientation, and the weights are as before. So what is the aim? So if we want to make this equal to the partition function or its negative, all we want is that all of these guys should have the same sign. So our problem is reduced to finding an O such that epsilon O of M is the same for all M. When this can go out, either it's plus or minus, it doesn't matter. If it's some, that's a minor headache. But as long as they all have the same sign, we are good. So suppose, or equivalently, for any M and M prime being perfect matchings of G, we want epsilon O of M, epsilon O of M prime equal to 1. Okay, good. Right? So if we want them to have the same sign, so either plus plus or minus. Okay. So now consider the key idea, and this was Castellan's key insight, is to observe, is to create the symmetric difference of M and M prime, i.e. which is denoted M delta M prime. So everybody knows what the symmetric difference is. The symmetric difference of two sets A and B is A minus B union B minus B. Okay. So what is this symmetric difference? Okay. So suppose you have two perfect matchings. Okay, maybe I should take a large example. Okay, since I have the benefit of a color. Let me take a graph, and let me take a grid graph, and I will draw two perfect matches. Okay, so here. Okay, that's one. And let me draw another one. Pink. I did maybe too nice an example. Okay, what should maybe this is the way out. Ah, yes, okay. Okay, so let me undo the last few. Do this. This. Okay, so what's going to happen when you, so I hope you see what's happening when you superimpose two perfect matches. So the symmetric difference means that whatever is in the intersection will go away. So this guy is not there. Okay. So can anyone from this figure tell me what is going to be left out? What are you going to get? What kinds of subgraphs are you going to get?
Like
Cycles, very good. But what kinds of cycles?
There'll be even cycles.
Even cycles, very good. Such that?
The alternate edges will be in M and M prime.
That's correct, exactly. Thank you. So right, Upamani is correct and Mohit also. So M and so M, the symmetric difference of M and M prime consists of a disjoint union of even cycles whose edges, so let me see, give them some names, C1 up to Cm in G, whose edges alternate between M and M. Exactly. Right? Just like in this figure, you can see there's this cycle, what is it? 8 cycle, no, 10 cycle, 4 cycle, another 4 cycle. Okay. Right. Perfect. So, okay, that's right. Okay, so let us try to understand what happens in this disjoint. Okay, so let's try to see the computation of this sign. Okay, so what's the point? So if we represent matchings mu and mu prime by permutations instead, permutations sigma prime instead, i.e. So this was what I said at the beginning. So if I write permutation satisfying this condition, so let me remind you what the condition is. So sigma 1 less than sigma 2, etc. Sigma 2n minus 1 less than sigma 2n, and sigma 1 less than sigma 3, etc. And similarly for sigma prime, then then the permutation representing M disjoint union, symmetric difference M prime is basically permutation tau, which is sigma prime composed with sigma inverse. And so what it is a permutation which goes, whose cyclic representation is these cycles, and for anything where it overlaps, they map to each other. Okay, so in this example, okay, so maybe I'll label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in this example, tau is the permutation, okay, which is 1, 6, 11, 16, 17, 18. I mean in cycle notation. 13, 12, 7, 2. And then 1. That's one cycle. The other cycle is, let's say, 3, 4, 9, 8. Then the cycle is 14, 15, 20, 19. And the last cycle is 5. 5 marks to 10 and vice versa. Okay? And this permutation is going to be precisely the composition of sigma prime with sigma inverse, because whenever you have sorry, no, that's wrong. No, so this will, okay, so sorry, so that was not right. So whatever edges are the same in both M and M prime will simply cancel away. So they'll become fixed points. Okay, so because sigma inverse will act the opposite of sigma prime, because in both. So for example, in sigma 5 will go to 10, but in sigma prime 10 will go to 5, and so when you take the inverse and compose them, they'll cancel. Okay. Okay. Is that clear? Any questions about that?
You can look at tau from the clockwise fashion. I mean, 1 goes to 2. I mean, is that incorrect? Or?
No, they're the same.
Okay.
Yeah, so, right. Okay, so I might have confused myself. So it's either one or the other. But it's not going to matter for
Okay.
what I'm going to do next. So, or its inverse, maybe I'll just say. So I'm not being super careful here. So it's either this or its inverse, which is 1, 2, 7, 12, etc. And same for all of these guys. Here, of course, there is nothing. Okay. All right. Thank you. So so this is C1. Let's say this is C2, and this is C3. This is, so maybe I should have written it here. So C1, C2, C3. Maybe I'll use another color because this is getting overcrowded. So this is C1, C2, C3. And I think I've used the same label. Yeah. Okay, so this is my disjoint cycle representation. Now here is a general fact about the sign of a permutation. So fact, which is not hard to do. I'll tell you how to do. The sign of a permutation, any permutation, with k even cycles is -1 to k. So, if you write the cycle decomposition for a permutation and you see how many cycles have even length, so if k of them have even length, then the sign of the permutation is -1 to k. It doesn't depend on which what are the things inside and in which order they are. It doesn't care about any of those. And the key reason why this is that in the cycle decomposition, you can really think of this as a product of cycles. So remember, the permutation, the set of permutations forms a group, and so tau you can think of as really C1 times C2 times C3, and the sign is a homomorphism, so it adds. So and if you have an even cycle, it's obtained by an odd number of transpositions, and each transposition gives you one sign. So any odd cycle will have an even number of transpositions, and so you don't care. But if you have an even cycle, you will get exactly one it has the same sign as exactly one transposition. So each one of them gives you one sign, and so the total sign is -1. So thus, by this argument, which you can fill out the details.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, it should be k even cycles, right?
Yes, that's what I said.
Okay.
K even cycles.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay.
Yes. So thus, sign of tau in according to my notation, tau is C1 up to Cn is -1 to n. And this is precisely why Aradhya, this I don't care about which whether it's one way or the other. Okay. So coming back to epsilon O of m times epsilon O of m prime. Epsilon O of n times epsilon O of n prime is the product over I going from 1 to n, because I'm looking at the combined sign of these two by superimposing them and looking at the symmetric difference, is precisely -1 to the NO of Ci plus 1, where NO of Ci is the number of edges. Ci, remember, is the cycle I, and there are m of them, is the number of edges of Ci differing from O when Ci is traversed along a certain direction. Since the cardinality of Ci is even, the direction does not matter. So why is this? So let's look at this. So you get a sign from each of these edges. It's either positive or negative. That was the contribution from here. And the sign from mu is that for every such cycle, I'll get a sign 1. There are m of them. So this -1 to the m, I've just distributed. I've given one sign to each cycle. Instead of putting a -1 to the m times -1 to the NO of Ci, I've just written it this way. Is that clear? So this is the total contribution of the sign. Okay. So when multiplying or when composing, I mean, so I mean, just to illustrate this last point, if I have a cycle, let's say, let's say I have an octagon, and I'll choose some random signs. So let's say, okay, so if I go clockwise, I'll get nothing from here, nothing from here, 1 from here. So maybe I'll 1 from here, 2, 1 from here, nothing, 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 2 from here. So second from here. So these two give a sign, and if I go counterclockwise, everything else will give, and the total is even. So the parity of both of them are the same. So either both are odd or both are. So either both give -1 or both give +1. Okay, that's it. Okay, but this gives a useful interpretation, and this is about the choice of orientation. So what is the conclusion? So if you can find an orientation such that this guy is always even, in other words, NO of Ci is always odd, then you are done. Then this product is always going to be a product of +1s, and so it's going to be +1. Okay, so we want to find an O such that NO of Ci, NO of C, let's say, is odd for every even cycle C, such that, not just every even cycle, when you remove C from G, so this is the graph obtained by removing the vertices of C and all incident edges. Admits a perfect match. Because you don't care about even cycles, which when you remove, give you something which does not admit a perfect match. Because that's not possible. Once you remove C, you should still have something that has a perfect matching. So in this example, let me use some other color. So let's say orange. Suppose I consider this cycle. So this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 vertices. So it is an even cycle, but I don't care about it because it encloses a single vertex. And if I remove this cycle, I'll get something which cannot have a perfect match. Okay, but I do care about even cycles like this and like this and so on. So I care about all of those, but not others. Okay, is this clear? Okay. So if you are able to find an orientation which satisfies all these properties, then you are done. Then you construct the oriented adjacency matrix using that orientation, take its Pfaffian, and it's going to give you the partition function of the diamond model. So such an orientation is called a Pfaffian orientation. So we have now narrowed down precisely what the condition is for getting a perfect match. For calculating the partition function as a Pfaffian. Okay, and this is so the next theorem, and so all these ideas are due to Castellane, and this is his main theorem. So it's called Castellane's theorem, and this is why the oriented adjacency matrix is often written with a K. Castellane's theorem. This is 1961. Let G be a planar graph. Which I will identify with its embedding, with its planar embedding, with any specific planar embedding that you like. Okay, so a planar graph, remember, is a graph which can be drawn. So again, I defined it in the last class. So it's a graph that can be drawn in the plane so that edges intersect only at the ends, and so it's going to have faces. Okay, so what this says, what Castellane's theorem says, is that there exists an orientation O of G such that for every face F of G, an O of the boundary of the face is odd, which is what we want. So if NO is odd, then NO plus 1 is even, but only for, so this theorem is only for a face. Okay, so furthermore, such an orientation is Pfaff. So this does this. Okay. So Castellane's theorem explicitly proves that planar graphs have Pfaffian orientations. So in other words, the dimer model on planar graphs can be computed using the Pfaffian, which is an enormous advantage. And if you go back, so Castellane was a physicist in Holland. He's a Dutch physicist, and when he published this paper, he was actually working in Shell, the oil company. So that's a funny answer. But from his point of view, also this was exactly what he wanted, because if you go back to the motivation, the surface of a solid is a planar graph. It's a lattice, 2D lattice. So this is exactly what he wanted, and he was able to solve this problem completely in full generality from his point of view. Of course, ideally one would like a solution for all graphs, but that ain't happening. Okay. So one can construct graphs, non-planar of course, which do not admit Castellano orientations. And in fact, there is a characterization of such graphs. Okay. So we'll prove
Sir?
this in steps. Yes, go ahead.
In a planar graph, a face can have, say, 3 edges, right? In that case, how is NO defined?
So we take right. So I'm going to come to that. We just fix an orientation. We say clockwise. So I'm just coming to that. Yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, since you anticipated something I was going to say later, things will simplify if we focus on planar bipartite graphs, which is the other reason I defined bipartite graph. So if a graph is both planar and bipartite, every face has an even number of vertices and edges, and so that hitch does not arise. Things get slightly complicated if you have non-bipartite planar graphs, but not very much. So I'm going to come to that. Yeah. So we will prove this in steps. So, first I'll define this clockwise motion. So an orientation O of a planar graph G is called Castellane if NO of delta F is odd for all faces F. So that's this definition. I mean, that's the notion we need here for all faces F. This is called in the clockwise direction, where the traversal is clockwise. So this is called the clockwise odd property. Also called I mean, there's nothing sacrosanct about clockwise. I mean, you could have done anti-clockwise or counterclockwise, but you fixed that concept. Okay, so first we will prove, we'll prove the first part of this theorem. Let's say it is lemma. There exists a Castellane orientation for any planar graph. Okay, so to prove this, I need the notion of a planar dual. So for any planar graph, I'm going slower. Okay, so for any planar graph G, there is a natural dual graph denoted planar. Denoted G star, constructed as follows. let me go on the next page. So V of G star is the set of faces of G. So each vertex in G star is a face in G. And so now I have to tell you the incidence relation. So if F1 and F2 share an edge in G, then they are adjacent. In G star. This is if and only. Okay, so if they do not share an edge, then you do not have them as adjacent. So for example, let me take a planar graph. So, let me, to anticipate or to keep in mind Sutanai's question, let me have some odd faces. So then what you do is you have each face here. So there are these. And these two are adjacent, so you draw them like so. These two are, okay. So you also should have the outer face. So I should say here, including outer face. So you have the outer face. So, right, so what? Okay, so now this gets a little messed up. So, so you have all these edges, which I can't draw in straight lines. But what is worse is that you have to draw multiple edges between two vertices. So for every face, so look at this face, the pentagon, it connects to the outside via three edges. So you have via three edges. So there are three edges in G star. So this is G star. So it's usually the planar dual is not a nice graph. Okay? Nice, not a simple graph. I mean, yeah. I mean, one can of course construct graphs which have simple duals, but then that class is extremely small. So it's not much use. Okay. So now another to get into the proof of this, I need another notion from graph theory. So a tree is a connected graph. Okay, I'm not. Now one can go. One can have an almost infinite regression. So I'm assuming everybody understands what connected graph means. So it just means that there is a path from between any two vertices. Well, what's a path? Path is the sequence of sequence of vertices, such that any two neighboring vertices have an edge. So, okay, so a tree is a connected graph with no cycles. No cycles or loops, if you like. It's just that you cannot traverse, you cannot find a path which goes all around and comes back home. Okay. I'm not being super precise because this will take me it'll take me a half an hour just to define all the notions, and these are pretty standard notions. And of course, if you have any doubts, you can ask me. Okay, so a tree is a connected graph with no cycles. So so this is obviously not a tree. There are very few trees compared to the total number of graphs, and they have very interesting structure also. So, for example, if you have a tree on n vertices, it necessarily has n minus 1 edges. It cannot have any more or less, and that restricts the class. And okay, so there are many properties. Okay, so I don't want to get into that. There are many nice theorems also. Okay. Okay, so a related notion is that of a spanning tree. So for any graph, a spanning tree is a subgraph which is a tree. So by subgraph I mean a graph obtained by an induced subgraph. So it's a graph obtained by selecting some edges. In particular, I mean that the subgraph includes all the vertices. So the vertices are all there. So a spanning tree, and this is what spanning means. So a spanning tree basically connects all the vertices of the graph, but has no cycles. Okay, so maybe on this same graph, I'll show you spanning trees. So, example, let me delete the blue things. Okay, let me draw it in this blue, let's say. So it has to touch every single vertex. So how do I draw this? Okay. Let's do something like that. Maybe I didn't choose a very good color, but this is not an edge. Okay, so this goes like so, like that, and like this. Okay, so this is the spanning tree. Oh boy, so I took way too much time to explain the thing. Okay, but I should be able to finish this proof. Okay, then I'll stop. So remember what we are trying to prove. So there exists a Castelline orientation for any planar graph. Okay. So let G be a planar graph. G star be its planar dual, and T be any spanning tree of G star. Okay, so what I'm saying, so when I say spanning tree, I mean it should not contain any cycle. So in particular, I can't choose two parallel edges because they will form a cycle also. So even though this is not a simple graph, the notion of spanning tree makes perfect sense. Okay, so that should not bother you. Okay, so so maybe it's a good idea to do a running example. So let me take this running example. Or rather, okay, so here is my running example, and let me draw a spanning tree in I don't know, some glaring color. So let's say, so it should span every single face of G, which is a vertex of G star, including the outer face. Okay. So, and should be a tree. So like this. Okay, this is nice and visible. Okay, here. And this. Okay, this is a tree, and it looks like Orion or something. Okay. So, all right. So now what we are going to do, so starting with the leaves of T, so this is T. T. So starting with the leaves of T, oh, okay, sorry. First I should, okay, so I'll start here. So first, orient the edges of T sorry, wait, what am I saying? I want, no, edges of G which do not intersect T. In whichever way you like, arbitrary. Okay, so there are all these edges, not this one, but the other ones. Okay, I'm running out of colors. So let's say orange. So let's say I orient this in some way. This, anyway. I mean, you pick whatever the hell you like. Okay, so this, I cannot touch this. I can touch this. So let's say like that. Okay, so that's what I've done. Have I missed anything? So I've missed 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? Everything else. Okay. Now the point is to start from the leaves of T. So this at the beginning. Remove the edges. Remove the edges of T. So you start with the leaf. Remove the edge. And orient the corresponding edge of G in the unique way to satisfy the clockwise order. You will find, if you think a little, and this gives us the proof. So let's go one at a time. So let us look, for instance, at this. I mean, one can also look at the outer face, but it's simpler to look here. So look at this leaf of T. Oh, by the way, if I didn't say, a leaf is a vertex with degree 1, so which has only one edge. Okay, maybe I'll put digression over here. Leaf is the vertex with degree 1 with one edge. Probably one. Sorry, I'm going over there. Okay, so but here you look at this leaf. Okay, so when you remove it, you have to orient this vertex, this edge. But there's only one way to orient it so that you satisfy this clockwise odd property for this face. Right. So this, as I go clockwise, this is 1, 2, 3. This already has 3. So I want to orient it in this direction so that this is clockwise odd, which is clockwise 3. So then when I remove this, I care about this triangular face. So then as I go clockwise, this is not clockwise, this is not clockwise, so this is 0 so far. So I want to make it clockwise, so I do it this way. Then when I remove this, I look at this face. This was not a leaf earlier, it's a leaf now. When I remove this, I go clockwise around this. So this is not clockwise, clockwise. So it's already clockwise 1. So I want to make this in this direction. Okay. And now I'm left with this, and there's only this pentagon. And when I count, I say 1, 2, 3, 3. So I orient it this way. And I'm done. Okay. So the key point is that this is a unique, there's one choice at every stage. One has to argue this a bit inductively, but it can be done. It's not too hard. So that that completes the proof of this one. And I think I'll stop here. Stop recording here.